At 4:17 a.m. on July 24, 2025, a 911 call echoed through the quiet luxury of Clearwater Beach. Hulk Hogan, the face of American wrestling's golden era, was gone, dead of cardiac arrest inside his $11.5 million waterfront mansion. But it wasn't just the loss of a legend that captured the world's attention. It was what authorities discovered inside the house: hidden rooms, sealed boxes, mementos never meant to be seen, and a troubling trail of secrets that had been festering behind Mediterranean revival walls for years. What was Hulk Hogan hiding all this time? And why did no one speak until after he was dead? Let's find out. He was quiet, large for his age, obsessed with guitars, baseball, and television wrestling. Born in Augusta, Georgia, but raised in Tampa, Terry Bollea didn't grow up in wealth or fame. His father was a blue-collar construction worker, his mother a homemaker. The family lived modestly, scraping by, believing in the American dream even when it rarely came knocking. But Terry was different. He idolized the larger-than-life stars on TV: superstar Billy Graham, Dusty Rhodes, and the brash, unbreakable villains they battled each weekend. Wrestling wasn't entertainment to him. It was mythology. And he didn't just want to watch it. He wanted to become it. Years later, after dropping out of college and dabbling in local bands, he stepped into a makeshift ring in a rundown Florida gym. That's where the transformation began. Trainers saw the raw size, the charisma, the hunger. They sculpted him into something more than a man. They created Hulk Hogan. And Terry disappeared. That hunger, once for recognition, grew into a monstrous appetite for power, for control, for adoration. By the 1980s, Hogan wasn't just a wrestler. He was a messiah in yellow spandex. Children looked up to him. Adults paid to believe in him. His name alone could sell out arenas across continents. But with fame came fractures. Fame blurred loyalties. And over time, Terry Bollea became a man obsessed with legacy, but terrified of being left behind. That fear lived with him in every mansion he bought, every friend he discarded, every enemy he recorded. By 2025, that fear had consumed him. That morning, as paramedics entered the Mediterranean-style mansion overlooking Clearwater Bay, the scene was deceptively peaceful. The infinity pool shimmered under the Florida sun. White columns stood tall. The American flag still flew at half-mast for an unrelated tragedy. Inside, Hogan, Terry, lay face down near his bed. His breathing had stopped. CPR failed. At 10:43 a.m., he was pronounced dead at Morton Plant Hospital. Cause: cardiac arrest. Police initiated a standard welfare check of the home. What they found was anything but standard. Behind the wine cellar, an officer noticed a faint breeze leaking through the faux stone wall. Odd in a climate-controlled room. A closer inspection revealed a concealed hinge. With some force, the wall swung open to reveal a spiral staircase descending into darkness. There were no lights, no wires, no blueprints to account for it. At the base, a soundproofed door, bolted, sealed, completely hidden from the rest of the home. Inside, boxes labeled with initials, locked filing cabinets, a film projector, a single chair beneath a mounted camera, and shelves of tapes and journals with dates stretching back decades. It wasn't a bunker. It was a confession chamber. Authorities were stunned. The contents were immediately secured. What began as a routine emergency call had become a high-priority investigation into the private life of one of America's most publicly celebrated figures. And none of it fit the public story, because for years, Hogan had insisted he had nothing left to hide. But in the days following his death, the house he lived in told a different story. One of secrets, paranoia, and a man who no longer trusted anyone, not even his own legacy. From the outside, The Clearwater Mansion was the embodiment of celebrity affluence, spanning over 5,400 square feet, with 5 bedrooms, 6 bathrooms, a private gym, spa, wine cellar, and a dock that jutted out into the Gulf like a throne into water. It was exactly the kind of palace you'd expect from a wrestling icon. Built in Mediterranean revival style, the house was purchased by Hogan in 2012, and following a public lawsuit that left his personal life stripped bare. This house was not just a home, it was an escape pod, a fortress, a do-over. But even as Hogan renovated the property to his liking, gutting entire wings, rerouting surveillance feeds, installing reinforced glass, those closest to him began noticing peculiar changes. One former contractor, who later spoke under anonymity, claimed Hogan requested specific construction features that didn't make sense for residential living. Soundproofing behind solid concrete, secret crawl spaces, walls that opened and shut via remote control. And then there was the media room. Unlike typical celebrity theaters with rows of plush recliners and candy machines, Hogan's was outfitted with a control center. Monitors played constant loops of old WWF matches, footage of his victories, edits of his most dramatic entrances. The room also contained dozens of labeled VHS tapes that appeared homemade, some dating back to the early 80s. Among the most shocking finds was a folder marked Contingencies. Inside were blueprints, schematics, and typed instructions on who to contact if something happens. One page bore the phrase, "If they try to rewrite history, play this." The deeper investigators went, the clearer it became. Hogan hadn't just been living in this house. He had been stockpiling a narrative. Friends had noticed his increased reclusiveness in recent years. He declined reunion shows, skipped WWE ceremonies, allegedly backed out of lucrative appearances. And while he maintained a public image of fitness and nostalgia, posing for fans, posting upbeat videos, privately, he was disappearing. His wife, Sky Daly, who had married him just 2 years earlier, told officers she'd grown concerned about his behavior. He was up all night, always watching tapes, always locking rooms when I walked by. She said she never knew about the hidden basement. When asked what she thought was inside, she reportedly said, "Proof." He always said people had tried to erase him. Maybe this was his way of staying permanent. The sanctuary Hogan built for himself wasn't just luxurious. It was defensive. Every design, every camera, every lock, it all pointed to one thing. He was preparing for a battle long after the final bell. For decades, Hulk Hogan stood as a towering symbol of American athleticism, a walking billboard of strength, fame, and patriotism. He signed endorsement deals with everyone from right guard to rent-a-center. He was the face of vitamins, protein powders, even grilled cheeseburgers. But behind the brand was a man whose opulence masked something more fragile: obsession. Inside his Clearwater estate, luxury didn't end at the obvious. The bathroom featured imported Italian marble, and the toilet seats were rumored to be heated and voice-activated. The gym was modeled after his early training facility, complete with custom iron dumbbells etched with the words "Brotherhood." The wine cellar contained not just wine, but bottles sealed with dates that corresponded to key moments in his career. In one hallway, framed magazine covers lined the walls like stained glass windows in a church. Each one showed Hogan's evolution, from muscle-bound babyface to scandal-scarred survivor. Some were autographed. Others were encased in glass so thick it distorted the image when viewed from the side. But what stood out most was the trophy room. In the center, a full-size statue of Hulk Hogan, carved in granite. Muscles flexed, mouth agape in mid-roar. Around it, trophies from bodybuilding competitions, honorary degrees, and custom-made belts not seen on any official roster. It was more than memorabilia. It was canonization. Yet tucked in the far corner, behind a curtain, was something else. A rusted folding chair, bent out of shape. A plaque beneath it read simply, "The night everything changed." No one, not even the most devout Hogan fans, could identify the reference. To many, the extravagance seemed excessive, but to Hogan, it was armor. It was the only way he knew how to survive a world that had already tried to destroy him once. Because luxury, for Hogan, wasn't about comfort. It was about control. And what he couldn't control in life, he preserved in stone, glass, and silence. The walls of Hulk Hogan's mansion weren't just designed for privacy. They were designed for containment. As the investigation unfolded, what began as a structural curiosity, the hidden staircase behind the wine cellar, turned into a labyrinth of intentional concealment. Inside the subterranean chamber was more than memorabilia. This was something else entirely. The first room resembled an evidence locker. File boxes lined the walls, meticulously labeled with shorthand code. Investigators found initials, some obvious, like VV for Vince McMahon, BL for Brooke Linda, and NB for Nick Balea. Others were more cryptic. T94R, JH Elk, Xtreme 92. Each box contained documents, video cassettes, photos, even receipts. Many were yellowed and fraying with age. Others were fresh, printed on sleek paper with dates from as recent as March 2025. One box included financial ledgers tied to old endorsement deals, some showing funds that had mysteriously disappeared mid-contract. Another contained legal transcripts from Hogan's 2016 court battle with Gawker, including internal memos leaked during discovery that had never been made public. Tucked between them, personal letters from media executives, hastily scrawled notes, and fragments of documents marked "Confidential, do not copy." In a small compartment locked behind tempered glass, detectives discovered a flash drive labeled Fusion. On it, encrypted video footage and an unmarked PDF titled Insurance Policy A. While officials declined to reveal the contents publicly, leaked sources described a series of video diaries from Hogan himself, none of them for public eyes. In one, he allegedly speaks directly to the camera. "When they come for the story, I'll already be gone. But they're not taking it. Not this time." As chilling as the data was, it wasn't the most unsettling feature of the vault. Near the rear of the chamber was a reinforced steel box bolted to the floor. Inside it were 3 locked binders containing what police called behavioral logs, entries monitoring interactions with visitors to the house. Timestamps, transcripts, notes on body language. Guests unknowingly recorded, documented, and categorized as loyal, uncertain, or compromised. This wasn't just a vault, it was a paranoia chamber. And yet, the deeper they dug, the more they found signs of a mind desperately clinging to clarity. The room was obsessively organized, dust-free, refrigerated. Batteries were changed regularly. Logs were updated with precision. The effort suggested long-term, calculated maintenance. Hogan had been adding to this collection for years. One officer, speaking under condition of anonymity, said the chamber gave him the creeps. He described it as part Cold War bunker, part confessional booth, part archive of grudges. But perhaps the most telling find was handwritten on the back of a matchbook, wedged into the crack of the security cabinet. If they want a hero, they can bury the costume. But if they want the truth, tell them to keep digging. And digging they did. Because the mansion wasn't just a home, it was the final desperate chapter of a man trying to narrate his own legacy before someone else could. The wine cellar was supposed to be elegant, a centerpiece of luxury. A hand-dug cavern lined with stone, fitted with mahogany racks, temperature control systems, and bottles valued at over $300,000 in total. But it wasn't the wine that drew the most attention. It was the whispers. Behind the decorative facade and Italian vintages, authorities found a door, flush with the wall, disguised by matching paneling. It led to a secondary chamber, just large enough for a table, a single chair, and a tripod-mounted camera. At first glance, it seemed like a private tasting room, but the atmosphere felt different, clinical, stage-like. The table was bare except for a mounted microphone, hardwired into a hidden server embedded in the floor. On the chair was a ring light, still warm when officers arrived that morning, indicating recent use. What they discovered next would shock even seasoned detectives. Over 300 hours of self-recorded monologues. Hulk Hogan, alone, speaking into the void. No interviewer, no audience, just him, talking. Sometimes for minutes, sometimes for hours. Each session was meticulously cataloged by date and topic. The labels ranged from the mundane, childhood regret, Linda, 2009, to the ominous, What Vince Knew, Tokyo Pact, and Sins of Summer, 1997. Some recordings featured barely coherent ramblings. Others were confessional gold. In one tape, he allegedly says, "I've been a puppet for most of my life. First by them, then by myself, but not anymore." In another, more pointed entry, dated March 15, 2023, he discusses a long-rumored altercation with another major wrestling figure. "He threatened me in my own home, said if I ever opened my mouth, there'd be no more Hogan. Well, here I am, mouth wide open." The language used wasn't theatrical, it was deliberate, cold, controlled, and that frightened investigators more than any outburst ever could. Audio analysis confirmed that many of these tapes included name drops, dates, even locations that could be cross-referenced with existing legal filings and industry rumors. While none of it, by itself, was criminal, it painted a detailed portrait of a man systematically documenting the inner rot of a billion-dollar industry. But the strangest element was the silence between words. Many recordings were punctuated by long pauses, minutes of nothing. No movement, no breathing, just Hogan staring into the lens, waiting, listening. It was as if he wasn't just recording a statement. He was daring someone to find it. One label stood out more than any other. The file name, Exit Interview. Authorities have declined to comment on the contents, but one source said it begins with a single sentence. "This wasn't the death I planned, but maybe it's the one I needed." While the mansion concealed secrets beneath its foundation, tensions in Hogan's personal life were becoming harder to hide, even on the surface. The past decade had not been kind. Hogan's return to WWE in the mid-2010s had been carefully orchestrated, but after the leaked audio scandal in 2015, his legacy fractured. Though he publicly apologized for racist remarks, the damage was lasting. Sponsors walked. Public sentiment cooled. Former colleagues turned quiet. And Hogan turned inward. Privately, friends noticed a shift. He began referencing invisible enemies, alleging that people in the industry were sabotaging him behind closed doors. He stopped attending industry events, canceled podcast appearances. One producer from a planned biography said Hogan scrapped the project after becoming convinced the writers were in on something. Those closest to him grew concerned. His wife, Sky Daly, noticed he'd stopped sleeping through the night. She told a reporter off the record that he would sometimes sit by the pool at 3 a.m., headphones on, watching old VHS tapes on a portable TV. When she asked him what he was doing, he reportedly said, "Just checking how it all got away from me." Family tensions were also worsening. Brooke Hogan, who once stood by her father through scandal, had not spoken to him in over a year. Nick, his son, moved across the country with little explanation. Some insiders claimed Nick distanced himself after receiving a threatening message from his father, an allegation never confirmed, but one that cast a shadow over their relationship. The neighbors noticed too. One local, who lived 2 homes down, said he saw Hogan pacing his backyard nightly, sometimes holding what looked like a recorder. Another described hearing loud music and shouting, though only one voice ever responded. And while public videos painted the image of a man still connected to fans, the reality inside that mansion was solitude. Controlled, ritualized, haunted. It was paradise by design. But even paradise, when built on paranoia, eventually begins to crack. And when it did, so did the myth. When Terry Bollea died, the world lost Hulk Hogan. But long before that, his family had already lost Terry. At the public memorial in Tampa, there was a conspicuous absence. Neither of his children, Brooke nor Nick, attended. His ex-wife, Linda Claridge, issued only a single-line statement: "We mourn privately." No tears for the cameras, no quotes for the headlines, just silence. Behind that silence, however, was a story of estrangement decades in the making. In the early 2000s, Hogan Knows Best painted the Bolleas as Florida's answer to the Osbournes, a quirky but loving family navigating fame with tanning beds and toothy grins. Brooke was the dutiful daughter-turned-pop star. Nick was the goofball son with a need for speed. Linda was the glue. And Hogan? He was the overprotective, muscle-bound patriarch who just wanted his kids to be safe. But off-camera, the family was cracking under the weight of its own mythology. The 2007 car crash that left Nick's friend, John Graziano, in a vegetative state was the first public fracture. The Bollea name, once associated with strength and integrity, became synonymous with recklessness. Hogan's statements at the time, some leaked in private calls, were perceived as callous. Nick spent months in jail. Lawsuits followed. And the family, once wrapped in yellow and red branding, began to unravel. In the years that followed, Hogan's relationship with Linda turned hostile. Accusations flew of abuse, manipulation, and infidelity. Linda claimed she was gaslit for years. Hogan called her greedy and ungrateful. The divorce was messy, and with it, the last remnants of their public unity disappeared. But it was his children who hurt him most, or at least that's what the contents of the hidden basement suggested. Inside the vault, police found entire folders devoted to Brooke and Nick, not filled with memories, but grievances. There were letters Hogan wrote but never sent, filled with blame, sorrow, and desperation. In one note to Brooke, scrawled in shaky handwriting, he wrote, "You loved the cameras more than me. They got to you first." In a voice recording dated June 2024, he laments, "Nick used to call me his hero. Now he won't pick up. I built this empire for them, and now I'm dying in it alone." The recordings weren't angry. They were mournful. The ravings of a man who had poured his life into a legacy, only to find that legacy wasn't enough to hold his family together. Worse still were the photographs. Tucked into a folder marked "Before the Fall" were dozens of images. Family vacations, birthdays, behind-the-scenes shots from early episodes of Hogan Knows Best. Each one bore a small, sticky note. Some said real, others said staged. It was as if Hogan, in his final years, had become a curator of his own collapse, compiling evidence, trying to understand where it all went wrong, who he lost, and why. Brooke would later release a single cryptic statement on Instagram. "Some people are legends, others are fathers, rarely both." Nick said nothing at all. In the end, the family he tried to immortalize on television had left the frame long before the cameras stopped rolling. And when the truth came pouring out of that mansion, it didn't just indict the man, it exposed the myth of the family he tried so hard to preserve. To understand the tragedy of Hulk Hogan, one must first confront the lie he lived by, that he was ever really Hulk Hogan. In public, he was the ultimate American icon, loud, loyal, and larger than life. But in private, Terry Bollea spent most of his later years trying to reconcile a painful truth, that he no longer knew who he was without the costume. The costume, of course, was figurative. It wasn't just the bandana, the mustache, or the catchphrases. It was the entire machinery of persona, carefully maintained for over 4 decades. Every handshake, every radio interview, every autographed action figure was part of an ecosystem that fed on image, an image that couldn't be broken. But the cracks had started to show. The sex tape scandal, the racial slur leak, the lawsuits, the exile from WWE. These events didn't just tarnish a reputation. They dismantled the scaffolding of a man who had forgotten how to exist outside of worship. After his 2016 legal victory against Gawker, Hogan reportedly became obsessed with control. Control over his likeness, his legacy, his story. He believed, according to people close to him, that a silent campaign was underway to erase him from the cultural record. And he responded the only way he knew how. He doubled down on being Hogan. He launched new merchandise lines, pitched documentaries, joined podcasts. He told the same stories, hit the same catchphrases, performed the same fan-facing charm. But behind closed doors, his recordings told another story. One entry from April 2021. "I know I'm just a mask now, but if I take it off, what's underneath? Just the boy from Tampa who never got to be anything real." That was the tragedy. Terry Bollea had achieved every dream, and yet none of it felt true. Inside the mansion's panic room, the final bunker of his soul, investigators found framed photos not of Hulk Hogan, but of Terry as a teenager. One with his high school wrestling team, another holding a guitar long before the ring. These were hung separately, away from the memorabilia shrine, behind a curtain. It was as if he needed to hide even from himself. The tapes revealed moments of bitter reflection. "I should have died in the ring," he said in one. "At least then they wouldn't have watched me rot." But it was more than bitterness. It was grief. For the man he once was, for the friends he had outlived, for the family that had grown silent. Hogan had become a legend, but Terry had been erased. And in the end, all that remained were the ruins of a life lived in character. After Hogan's death, the gates of his mansion remained closed, but the questions didn't. For weeks, local authorities and federal investigators combed through the estate. There was no evidence of foul play, no signs of a break-in, but what they found inside was enough to make the press swarm like vultures. And soon, the leaks began. Clips from the recordings started surfacing online, first on obscure wrestling forums, then Reddit, then YouTube. By August 2025, was trending on every platform. One particularly damning clip featured Hogan alleging that prominent figures in the WWE had covered up abuses during the company's 1990s boom. Another contained a cryptic reference to "pills in plain sight," a phrase fans believed pointed to the deaths of fellow wrestlers that had long been rumored to involve backstage knowledge. But perhaps the most haunting tape was the one labeled "Exit Interview." In it, Hogan stares silently into the lens for nearly 3 minutes before saying, "If you're watching this, they've already decided what I was. I'm just here to say they're wrong." The clip ends abruptly. The internet responded with chaos. Supporters claimed it was proof Hogan had been blackballed by an industry that used and discarded its stars. Critics argued it was the ravings of a man crumbling under his own myth. WWE issued a brief statement honoring his legacy and contributions to the sport, but refused to comment on the contents of the tapes. Behind the scenes, lawyers moved quickly. Injunctions were filed. Alleged victims named in the tapes demanded privacy protections. Former colleagues lawyered up, but the genie was out of the bottle. The world had heard Hogan speak beyond the script, and they couldn't unhear it. The estate remained under lock and key. The mansion, once a palace of fame, now loomed like a mausoleum of secrets. Its gates may have been closed, but the truth was already on the move. There was a time when Hulk Hogan's name stood above all others, not just in wrestling, but in culture. He was the icon, the voice of Saturday mornings, the face of a million childhoods. But legacies are fragile things. In death, the man who had spent his final years recording truth and stockpiling secrets saw his myth unravel under the weight of the very archive he created. The tapes, the journals, the confessions, they weren't just revelations. They were indictments of friends, of family, of himself. He had wanted to be remembered. He will be, but not as he hoped. The house has since been sealed. A probate judge placed the estate into temporary receivership. Several individuals named in his recordings have filed preemptive lawsuits to block distribution. Brooke and Nick remain silent. The tapes, the letters, the raw confessions, no one knows what will be released and what will vanish into legal oblivion. And yet, the image persists, not of Hulk Hogan in the ring, but of Terry Bollea alone in a dark cellar, staring into a camera, whispering to an audience that might never exist. In the end, he built a fortress not to protect himself, but to make sure the world never forgot how deeply it had betrayed him. The truth, at last, had surfaced, and it didn't set him free. A hero turned prisoner, a mansion turned mausoleum, and a legacy dismantled by the very hands that built it. What do you believe was the real truth behind Hulk Hogan's final years? Comment your thoughts below. Subscribe for more exposés, and never take a public persona at face value, because behind every icon lies a story buried deeper than you think.